you might be wondering, what does a narrow waterway in the Middle East actually have to do with the price of fuel, electricity, transportation, food, and the entire global economy? Well, the answer is way more than you might think. You see, we often get totally caught up in how much energy we produce, but modern civilization relies entirely on whether that energy can move safely from where it's pulled out of the ground to where it's actually needed.
What's truly staggering is the sheer physical vulnerability of this specific passage. At its narrowest point between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, the Strait of Hormuz is only about 54 kilometers wide, but it gets even tighter than that. The commercial shipping lanes, the actual navigable waters that are deep enough for those massive tankers, are squeezed into a microscopic 3.7-kilometer channel in each direction. It is an incredibly tight needle to thread.
Now, think about the incredible scale of what's passing through that tiny needle. In 2025, about 20 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products were shipped through the strait every single day. That's 25%, a full quarter of all global seaborne oil trade. Just to put that into perspective for you, that equates to roughly 1 out of every 5 barrels of petroleum consumed globally. A fifth of the entire world's oil habit is flowing through a 3.7-kilometer channel.
This paints a pretty profound picture of our global vulnerability. So where's all this oil going? The vast majority, around 80% of it, is actually destined for Asian markets. In 2025, China and India alone absorbed 44% of the crude oil passing through the strait. This means Asia is exceptionally vulnerable to this specific choke point. For their massive economic engines to keep running, Hormuz absolutely must remain operational.
At this point, you're probably asking, why not just bypass it, take another route, right? Well, alternative pipelines in Saudi Arabia and the UAE do exist, but the math just doesn't add up. Normal Hormuz volume is around 20 million barrels a day. The alternative pipeline capacity? Only about 4.7 million barrels. You physically cannot squeeze 20 million barrels of flow into 4.7 million barrels of pipeline capacity. That structural vulnerability is completely baked into the system.
Because of this massive bottleneck, the market reaction to any issue is practically immediate. Markets don't wait for physical shortages at the pump. Just the mere uncertainty of a supply disruption immediately elevates risk. Buyers start panic buying or they pay massive premiums to secure future supply. And that instantly sparks higher oil prices, which directly pushes up transportation and production costs, fueling global inflation. The economic shockwave literally travels faster than the ships themselves do.
To see this exact dynamic in action, we just have to look at the real-time data. As of August 20, 2026, commercial traffic through the strait remains severely disrupted. Governments continue to disagree over the exact status of the waterway, but the tracking data shows only 9 commodity vessels passing through daily, which is a dramatically low number. As a direct result of that, Brent crude spiked to $94.06 per barrel, and WTI hit $87.67. It's a perfect demonstration of how uncertainty instantly equals higher costs.
We generally just think of oil when we think of the Middle East, right? But that's only half the story. Hormuz is also the central artery for liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Qatar and the UAE are huge exporters, and practically all of their supply passes right through this exact corridor. In fact, nearly 19%, so almost a fifth of all global LNG trade, moves through the strait. This means any disruption at Hormuz isn't just an oil crisis. It's actually a dual-threat energy crisis.
The really crucial point here is the sheer unbelievable volume of this gas. If you've been following European energy news, you definitely know about the Nord Stream pipeline. Well, get this. The disrupted LNG supply at Hormuz represents more than 300 million cubic meters of gas per day. That's roughly twice the average volume of gas that flowed through the infamous Nord Stream pipeline back in 2021. It is a staggering amount of energy to suddenly yank out of global availability.
And here's exactly how that directly impacts you. Natural gas isn't just used for heating homes. An LNG shortage means gas-fired power plants have to drop their output, massively straining electricity grids. But crucially, natural gas is a primary ingredient in fertilizer. If the gas stops flowing, fertilizer production comes to a grinding halt. And if farmers can't get fertilizer, agricultural yields plummet and your food prices surge. It's all connected.
Countries that rely heavily on imported gas are facing immense risks here. Take Bangladesh as a prime example. In 2024, gas-fired generation accounted for about 50% of their total electricity supply. Pakistan relies on gas for about 25% of theirs. When almost two-thirds of their LNG supply comes through the Strait of Hormuz, a disruption doesn't just mean a higher electric bill, it means very real potential for blackouts and rolling industrial shutdowns. Is the natural question on everyone's mind. If fossil fuels are this incredibly vulnerable to a single geographic choke point, doesn't a rapid switch to solar and wind solve our geopolitical problems overnight? Well, it's not quite that easy. Replacing fossil fuels is not simply a matter of installing more solar panels. While solar heavily reduces our need for fossil fuel imports to run the electrical grid, it doesn't easily replace aviation fuel. It doesn't replace the petrochemical feedstocks we need for manufacturing or the intense industrial heat required for making things like steel and cement.
And this brings us to the real nuance of the energy transition. Moving to clean energy doesn't magically eliminate geopolitical risk, it just changes its address. We are basically trading our fossil fuel risks, like those geographic choke points and physical tanker dependencies, for renewable energy risks. Suddenly, we become highly dependent on critical mineral supply chains, heavily concentrated battery manufacturing, and inverter technologies. We swap out the oil tankers for supply chains of raw materials.
So, what's the actual blueprint for true energy security? Well, it requires a massively upgraded, highly resilient energy system. This means we have to diversify our generation, using solar, wind, and nuclear where it's appropriate. It requires incredible leaps forward in long-duration battery storage, vastly upgraded transmission grids to avoid local bottlenecks, and completely diversifying where we get our technology supply chains from. True security means avoiding a single point of failure, no matter what kind of fuel you're using.
I want to end this explainer with this thought right here. The crisis at the Strait of Hormuz teaches us that energy security isn't just a simple math problem of how much energy we produce. It's all about resilience. The ultimate challenge of our time is not just finding enough energy, but figuring out whether we can actually build an energy system that remains reliable when the world itself becomes unstable. Are we just trading one vulnerability for another? Thanks so much for joining this explainer. I'll let you think on that.